I encounter a lot of crime related stories on this channel, and oftentimes I'm encountering a headline, and when I read into the article, thankfully, the headline is worse than the actual story. However, on occasion, and this feels like it happens more and more often, the headline undersells what's going on. So today we're going to talk about a story out of DC where a career criminal, who of course was cut break after break after break, killed a 31-year-old woman who was in town for a concert with no mercy. And as we progress through this story, you'll understand what I mean about each and every factor making the case so much worse. But before we get into the story, this video is in fact sponsored, so let me toss it to the sponsor, then I'll come back over here and we'll talk about it on the other side. 52% of Americans report right now that they're attempting to lose weight, meaning if you're among two people and you're not trying to lose weight, the other person likely is, statistically. This is why a lot of people are going to ketowithjustice.com and getting this amazing keto power, because it's difficult to lose weight and you need something to elevate your chances. And this works by elevating the ketones in your body, quickening the metabolism so you can shed those lbs and meet your weight loss goals. And the great thing about ketowithjustice.com, other than the fact that it supports this channel, is that you could try it risk-free, 60-day money-back guarantee for 51% off just by going to ketowithjustice.com. Start your weight loss journey, continue your weight loss journey, age your weight loss journey over at ketowithjustice.com and support the channel. That's ketowithjustice.com.
A young woman from Virginia in town to see a concert stabbed to death at a D.C. hotel. And we just learned the suspect, an unhoused man, will be held without bond on first-degree murder charges.
So one of the first things that I have to make clear right off the bat, and it already pissed me off as soon as I started watching this local news segment, is the fact that anyone who uses the term unhoused to describe a homeless person is in fact your enemy. They are somebody who is trying to paint this person as the victim of society, because apparently it's society's job to house these people, rather than point out the fact that this person's violent criminal history, possible mental issues, are in fact responsible for the position that he finds himself in. I can't stand this language that is intended to victimize the perpetrator right off the bat from the local news, especially as we get further into the story and you realize how ridiculous it is. This idea that the progressives have, that they could just change the language and thus reframe the issue, is so obnoxious and so annoying, and I can't stand to hear it in a murder trial where a homeless career criminal committed this violent and brutal murder.
Leslie, there is just massive evidence in this case that sounds like a real-life horror film. Police say that they all but caught the suspect, a bloody, unhoused man, George Sydnor Jr., red-handed after he stabbed Christy Bautista 30 times in the chest, in the back, and in the head.
So he's being held without bond, which is great. It would have been nice if this would have happened before. It would have been nice if the police actually tracked this down for the 2 open bench warrants, if this person wouldn't have been cut break after break after break by the prosecution. But this is where we're at in terms of Washington, D.C. Obviously, it's one of these cities that catered to the Black Lives Matter rioters. When they saw rioting destroying the productive businesses in their area, they decided the response to that was to drop all the charges against the rioters and make sure you paint Black Lives Matter on the street, because oh my god, what a civil rights movement. Look at them loot that Nike store. Isn't that a protest about civil rights?
Devastated family members say Christy Bautista, 31 years old, was just in town for a concert. Surveillance video shows she checked into the Ivy City motel just before 6 p.m. on Friday. About an hour later, police say Sydnor rode a red bicycle into the parking lot and then pushed into her room. On the video, sounds of a struggle, several thuds, and a woman yelling, "Help! Help!"
Yeah, so Bautista, like I said earlier in the open, is in town for a concert. She checks into a motel where she's staying before she's going to go to this concert, and an hour later, this career criminal, homeless maniac, decides to get into this place and start attacking her. A man hears the struggle, hears what's going on, he's out for a smoke, he ends up calling 911, and the police, by the way, when seconds count, were minutes away, took 10 minutes to respond.
A man out for a smoke called 911 after seeing a woman open the front door of room 116, visibly in distress, yelling for help. Police arrive within 10 minutes, bang on the door. A man says everything is fine, but they see blood on his hands through half-open blinds. Police get a master key and find Bautista lying on the ground, covered in blood from multiple apparent stab wounds.
Look, I hate to be this guy, and what we ultimately ended up finding out was that Bautista was not going to make it. But if you take 10 minutes to respond to a 911 call of a woman being attacked by a maniac in her motel room, I don't think the proper protocol is to wait for a master key before you breach the place. Especially when you see a man covered in blood through the blinds, that should give you a sense of urgency and should require you to kick down the door and do what needs to be done with this individual. Now, of course, I'm giving the caveat that Bautista unfortunately was not going to make it anyway from what went down. Maybe if the police responded within 1 minute, she would have had a chance, but at this point in time, the crime was basically committed. But still, it just bothers me that they went and sought out a master key when they could see this woman bleeding out through the window and the perpetrator covered in blood saying, "Oh, everything's fine, don't worry about it." It just doesn't seem like it has the sense of urgency that should be required.
Sydnor in the room trying to light a cigarette. Police find a Santoku-style knife, half the blade broken off, the other half inside Sydnor's black jacket. Police say there was blood on his shoes, his pants, his blue fleece vest, and that he admitted he'd got his hand chopped with a knife.
Now, when I first heard about this guy being caught red-handed, covered in blood, with the knife broken off, handle, all the evidence pointing towards this individual, I thought to myself, this is likely one of the cases that Kim Kardashian should get on board with, because it's eerily similar to the Purvis Payne case.
The medical examiner says Bautista had been stabbed dozens of times in the spine, the lungs, and the liver, her ribs broken by the force, and she may never have had a chance to defend herself. There were no defensive wounds.
When I first heard this news piece, which by the way went out of their way to open the segment by claiming that the perpetrator in this case was the victim, saying that he was unhoused, victimized by our evil capitalist society not providing him free and guaranteed housing, I was struck by the idea that Bautista wouldn't have any defensive wounds on her body, that she wouldn't have had any mechanism of fighting back against this perpetrator, and I just found that very odd considering that there were 30 stab wounds. This was a very brutal attack. However, when I looked into the case, I told you it was going to get worse each and every step of the way. It turns out there's a reason for that, and it was actually stated, although not really outlined correctly in this local news segment. Again, they spent a lot more time talking about how unhoused the perpetrator was because, you know, he's the real victim here if you think about it, the victim of our evil system. But in reality, that wound to the spine likely paralyzed her.
Guys, according to court documents, it says that the suspect stabbed 31-year-old Christy Bautista multiple times. The medical examiner is saying she had about 30 sharp force injuries, and one of them puncturing her spinal column, likely causing paralysis.
So this man, this murderer, this repeat offender that the local news wants you to know is unhoused and thus a victim of our capitalist society, stabbed her at one point in time earlier in the attack in the spine, paralyzing her to the point where all she could do was scream for help, as essentially she was trapped in her own body as this person was taking her life. Hey guys, editing Sean here. I just realized at the time of editing this video that there is a GoFundMe for Christy Bautista. Now, I know some of you don't like GoFundMe. I understand that, but this is how her family is choosing to raise money, so I'm going to link it in the description so you guys can donate if you're so inclined to support this victim who should not be gone. Of course, one of the things that makes this horrific crime even worse is the fact that this is somebody who has been privileged in our criminal justice system. He has been cut break after break after break, even though his crimes would lead anybody with half a brain to understand that this was a pattern of behavior, as he specifically targeted women in the past with weaponry to commit crimes.
We learned today Sydnor had 2 bench warrants out against him at the time of this fatal stabbing. One was for an incident in October of 2022 where a woman was said that the suspect had robbed her of her car keys and phone at gunpoint. Court documents say the U.S. Attorney's Office was against his release last December, telling the court that Sydnor already had a concerning history of violence and noncompliance while on supervision, but then a plea agreement was made lessening charges. It's not clear if the USAO still protested his release after that plea agreement was made. The other bench warrant, I'm told, was for a larceny case out of Maryland.
So this guy committed an armed robbery. He pointed a gun at a woman, robbed her of her car keys and of her phone, was arrested. The U.S. attorney did not want this person to be released. Eventually, they come to a plea deal. However, they decided to release him under the premise that he would come back later for sentencing. At some point, he was supposed to receive GPS monitoring. He never showed up for that. He had another open case out in Maryland. He also wasn't showing up for those court dates, and this was just allowed to happen. This person who showed a long history, and these are just the recent cases where he was recently released that led specifically to this murder occurring, but he had a longer history before that of non-compliance and not showing up to court, not following the rules, and not getting the message, and yet he got a sweetheart plea deal. And he still didn't even comply with the terms of that plea deal. All they had to do was hold this guy when he pointed a gun at a woman and robbed her on the serious charges that it was. He did that in October. He pled guilty in January, yet he's out March, April to commit this crime. I mean, honestly, who comes up with this criminal justice policy? After the person pleads guilty, you know he has this history. You let him out and tell him to come back in February to get his sentencing. He doesn't show up, and then you're like, oh, well, no big deal. I mean, honestly, should we even be that upset? Because this Aladdin is actually an unhoused Aladdin, meaning he's kind of victimized by our society, so it's our fault anyway that this person keeps committing crimes. It's not crazy to think that a 31-year-old woman in this country, citizen of our country, should be able to go visit our nation's capital, stay in a motel for more than an hour before she's attacked by an insane homeless person with a long history of criminality, somebody who should be behind bars, as he is supposed to be sentenced in February for an armed robbery that he committed against another woman. That's not outrageous. That's not a crazy demand. This is not a case of a criminal who came out of nowhere that nobody would have suspected. This is somebody with a long history and a long pattern of behavior. But we have decided that long history, long pattern behavior actually means long history of systemic abuse by the racist criminal justice system. It was so racist of the criminal justice system to reduce his armed robbery charges, tell him to just show up in February, and then hope and pray that he would, have him not show up and not send people out looking for him, not making it a point to track this guy down. This person who, despite being unhoused by our society, clearly and obviously was able to obtain a firearm illegally, has been able to obtain a knife, has no problem attacking and threatening women, and now somebody's dead that didn't need to die. Christy Bautista's social media page should be bad footage of holding up your phone, filming the concert, even though nobody's gonna want to see that, but instead it's a memorial for the loss of life. This is not how it should be. It's unacceptable, yet we see this happen more and more, time and time again, and people keep expecting it to go away, or try to ignore it, or try to pretend that it's not happening, or pretend that we're somehow realigning the cosmic scale and thus creating a form of social justice in response to the criminality. But guess what? These people are not victims, they are perpetrators. The only victim is the poor woman who was dead in that motel just trying to see a concert. And as soon as our society gets that through its head, we will actually be able to address and solve these problems. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about yet another heinous crime that could have been prevented, that should have been prevented. Till next time.